Welcome back. I'm Avery Cooper. Your stream brought to you by People's Bank and Trust. They put people first. Landmark of Taylorville. You always do better with Landmark. We are in studio with University of Illinois Extension horticulture educator Andrew Halsinger. Welcome back to the program, Andrew.
Hey, nice to be here.
It's great to hear from you. So, it should be planting season. Wet weather aside, and hopefully we can kind of get into our gardens here soon. So we're here to talk to you a little bit about some advice on how to keep our garden nice and flourishing and, well, everything that we hoped for back in winter.
Oh, sure. Well, It is a little bit wet out there, and we're supposed to be getting some more rain. And that's one thing you want to avoid is getting in the garden when it's so wet. And, tilling practices whenever you go to till, it can just create some big clods of soil. And so you want it to dry out whenever you're going to be getting in the garden, getting that tillage done. If you're going to till your garden, you want to, have like a wrung out sponge kind of, at least that or drier before you get out there and get in the garden to do your planting. I know sometimes it seems like it's unavoidable because it's just so wet, and it has been quite wet throughout the duration of this spring, but it has done good for some plants. I saw some Virginia bluebells and the wildflowers. They look just fantastic. They're just plants have different characteristics, and so you just have to deal with what Mother Nature is giving you and make the most of it. But we have also had some cooler weather, and so that affects planting dates as well, the chance of frost. But hopefully pretty soon we'll be out of the not so nice weather and move on to some planting and getting the garden going.
When it comes to a wetter spring like we've had so far, what kind of plants thrive and what kind of plants struggle in this time of year?
Usually the ones with the cool, wet weather, they're conducive to growing in those conditions. And so I think of things like a lot of times we have a lot of weeds that are winter annuals, or they like that cooler weather, and they slowly begin to die out as the summer, the temperatures change and the amount of moisture they have. They begin to struggle and die out, and they are an annual plant, so they do die. But they produce a lot of seeds. And so you probably see some of these weeds maybe in your lawn, maybe the henbit that has a little bit of a purple flower to it. And so you just can wait for those to make their way out of your lawn, or you can pull them. But, if you use herbicide on those weeds, they're going to die anyway. So you need to strategize on the products that you use, and the life cycle of the weeds is important to know. And then, it just depends on the time of year and the plant, and all the environmental factors factor into the success. And it can factor into some disease pressures as well.
And how long does it need to be before we can need to be of like nice weather, right? To where before we can kind of get into that, all right, let's start attacking this garden. Let's start planting our seeds and let's go full swing into gardening season. When is that roughly? Or I guess, what are we looking for in the conditions of the weather right now?
Well, definitely the soil characteristics of being able to get out. And if you get out too early, you're just going to cause compaction. And so the soil is going to be more compacted and harder to deal with. Now, there are some things you could do to combat some of the wet weather. If you wanted to put a raised bed, you're not dealing with the native soil. You may have some potting mix that's in a bag. It's been protected from the elements and not gotten as wet. So you could plant above the ground and then avoid some of these problems that we have in our planting in the ground whenever you've had all this moisture.
So, in other words, you can do it now if you have a raised bed.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah. Okay. But then we want it to kind of dry out a little bit, though, for those who don't have the raised bed. Right.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Hmm.
And so one of the things I think that a lot of people are focusing on, and while they're trying to figure out when can I plant these tomatoes, which of course you're kind of like June, July-ish on harvesting. Um, but you have a program coming up May 5th that has all to do about growing tomatoes. We're talking about tomatoes here, and an event coming up May 5th for the University of Illinois Extension.
Yeah, they are in the same family, tomatoes and potatoes. But talking about tomatoes, uh, they are the classic. Every gardener likes to have probably a tomato, and it's the most popular tomato and vegetable variety. So there's all different kinds of tomatoes to grow. You have hybrid tomatoes, heirloom tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, just all different shapes and sizes. And so we'll talk about some of the things that can go wrong with tomatoes and help to steer you in the right direction and getting your tomato garden growing the best that you can to help avoid insects and diseases. I know I've encountered the tomato hornworm a time or two, and it's really not a good experience whenever you've had your tomato vines eaten by the hornworm and have to deal with the repercussions of that.
I mean, what are the repercussions of that?
Well, it's not going to produce tomatoes if the the vine is gone, and so you need to be scouting for some of those insects and uh, looking to use the best cultural practices to keep your plants healthy.
With this spring that we've had, is it more likely that you'll see pests like that?
Tomato hornworm.
Yeah, like you mentioned there.
It all depends. Sometimes when we get to May and June, especially June around Father's Day, I think of the Japanese beetle. And so they come out about that time, but they overwinter in the soil. And so depending on the soil conditions factors into their population and how they survive throughout the winter. So usually the more moist conditions are more conducive to their survival because they're a grub. And so those grubs can stay in the soil and eat some of that plant material underground and make their way out as a beetle in the summer.
I don't want you to give away anything when you have this event coming up in a little more than a week about growing tomatoes, but as someone who gardens quite a bit himself, what's your favorite tomato growing trick or maybe tidbit?
I think the best tidbit or knowledge to give is to keep the foliage dry. So if you can water at the base of the plant or avoid overhead irrigation, that's probably the best scenario because tomatoes are kind of a magnet for fungal diseases. There's a lot of different fungal diseases, septoria leaf spot. And so if they get those diseases, they tend to lose their leaves or struggle along throughout the rest of the season. So keeping the foliage dry, and that even goes for whenever you're picking to avoid picking whenever the foliage is wet because you could spread disease throughout your garden whenever you're in the garden and touching the foliage and then touching other plants. You can spread diseases and not even realize that you're doing it.
It's interesting too, because then you think about the humidity of an Illinois summer too, and that just if you get it wet, right, it's going to stay that kind of humid and warm and kind of perfect environment for fungal diseases to kind of blossom, is what I'm thinking.
And so your bonus tip for today is also to keep your plants spaced properly. So the more spacing that you have, the more airflow that can get in and to help dry out those plants.
Excellent. Cool. And so that event is coming up May 5th. We have another one that we're going to talk about here in a moment, but we got to take a break. So, but before we take that break, wanted you to be able to give all the details of when, where, how people can sign up for that event about growing tomatoes.
All right. Yeah, it's going to be held at the Taylorville Public Library on May 5th from 11 to noon. And you'll be able to sign up at our website, extension.illinois.edu. You can probably get there easily by go.illinois.edu/CJMM. That stands for Christian, Jersey, Macoupin, and Montgomery counties.
That's University of Illinois Extension horticulture educator Andrew Hulsinger here on the WTIM Morning Show. More from him in a moment. I'm Avery Cooper. Your stream is sponsored by People's Bank and Trust. They put people first. At Landmark of Taylorville, you always do better with Landmark. Welcome back to the WTIM Morning Show. I'm Avery Cooper. Your stream brought to you by People's Bank and Trust and Landmark of Taylorville. Always do better with Landmark. I'm here in studio with University of Illinois Extension horticulture educator Andrew Hulsinger, and the Extension offering a bunch of courses on how to keep your gardening, well, keep you happy while you garden. And one of the ways you can do that is with a raised bed. And Andrew Hulsinger is here to talk with us about the ways that you can garden with a raised bed, and also the University of Illinois Extension having an event coming up here soon.
Yeah, sure. So raised bed gardening is a pleasure for gardeners, especially as you get older. You don't like to bend down quite as much, and to get the harvesting and the aspects of gardening, just having an elevated bed makes it a little bit easier to reach and to work in the ground and the soil. But typically for a raised bed, we'll have probably at least 10 to 12 inches of soil, usually a potting mix, maybe a compost 50-50 with that. They do sell some raised bed mixes that probably have an appropriate balance of components into those mixes. But it is really a nice, usually a weed-free kind of environment because you're not dealing with a fresh weed bank of seeds that are going to germinate. And so I prefer the raised bed in some situations. It makes for a good environment for growing, and you could even put a cover over those, with a piece of PVC or a wire, put a frost covering, a frost blanket over that, and have some extension to your season. It's just a nice way to garden.
Sounds like a lot of flexibility.
There is quite a bit of flexibility and a lot of different styles and methods of building a raised bed. One thing is your materials. You want to make sure you have food safety in mind if you're growing a food crop in a raised bed. So we avoid things like railroad ties and things with creosote in them, and even your pressure treated lumber. We try to avoid back about 2004, they stopped making the pressure treated lumber that had arsenic in it, but you just want to be mindful of food safety whenever you're growing your crops. But it is a nice, convenient way to garden and have, even a little bit of an eye appeal to the garden with a raised kind of trellised look.
Do you have to build your own raised bed, or can you buy one?
You can buy one. They do offer kits, and there's many different styles and shapes, and you can get some that have some fencing built into panels to help maybe protect it from the rabbits. That's another thing to think about whenever you're gardening is protecting your investment of gardening from the rabbits or the deer. You could put up a fence or try to just find the balance of where you have your garden at and maybe your deer population to weigh out the how successful you're going to be with gardening. I know a fence can go a long way into providing some protection.
And again, we're bringing this up because University of Illinois Extension is hosting a raised bed gardening informational course here coming up in May.
Yeah, we're going to have a class on raised bed gardening that's going to be at the Taylorville Public Library on May 19th, and it's going to start at 2:00. So it's nice to share information with the general public, and we'll have time for questions. And if you have gardening questions throughout the season, you can contact our office, and we also have master gardeners that are going to be starting up a help desk here in Taylorville here in the near future.
Early May?
Early May.
Right.
Yep.
I know that's a very popular service that the University of Illinois Extension offers every summer. Also, before you go, I wanted to let you provide the details of the plant sale. We've talked about it with Gwen Podesky a couple times, but
sure.
More the merrier. When is the plant sale?
So the Christian County Master Gardener Plant Sale is going to be held at the Christian County Extension Office. That's going to be May 14th, starting at 9 a.m., and they'll go until they're sold out. So a lot of different plants that they will have available, and you'll be able to do your share of shopping if you show up and get there early.
Over or under, the plants will sell out at 10 a.m. Before or after? What do you think?
They'll probably go fast. I don't know if it'll.
You don't know by 10 a.m.
I don't know if by 10 a.m., but a good deal of maybe the better selections would go
before then.
Quicker before then.
All right. That is University of Illinois Extension horticulture educator Andrew Hulsinger. Thank you so much for coming on the program, Andrew.
Hey, it's good to be here.
People's Bank and Trust proud to bring you this stream along with Landmark of Taylorville. You always do better with Landmark. For Andrew Hulsinger, I'm Avery Cooper.